Absolutely. Marco, let's get right to it. It's 2 games left. Montreal, New England Revolution. You need 2 wins, and you need Columbus Crew to have 2 losses. I think it's impossible, especially after that demoralizing loss against the New York Red Bulls. I saw no passion, no desire, and no real interest in sacrificing their bodies to try and get that win. How did you see that game play out against the Red Bulls on the weekend?
Well, Anthony, I think you hit the nail on the head there. As much as the loss in New York hurt us, I think it was really Wednesday's loss against Houston that really did us in, because that's the game you have to win. Going to New York was always going to be tough, but going down 3-0 at halftime, I think that was the really frustrating aspect of the game. And
that, to me, Marco, is the million-dollar question that I said at the beginning of this season and at the beginning of many other seasons here in Toronto. It is so vital and important to win your home games, because MLS is a league that I've said for the longest time really relies on your home wins to get you into the playoffs. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're 100% right, and they dropped way too many points at home. I mean, it was great to see them come back against Portland, but when you go down 2-0, like we've seen so many times before, there's only so many times you can come back. I mean, we saw what happened against New England in Jermaine Jones' first game back in the league, and how they lost 3-0 there, which ultimately did Nelson in. They just dropped way too many points at home, and in a midweek fixture against Houston, I know it's tough, but it's a game you have to win. We saw what happened. They created all kinds of chances, but they couldn't put the ball in the net. And come Saturday, you go into New York, you go into Red Bull Arena, and we saw what happened there. It's frustrating for fans, it's frustrating for the team, it's frustrating for the organization. And I was at training today, and you're right, I mean, it's impossible to make the playoffs. So let's be honest here, because even if you beat Montreal, and even if Columbus does lose their last 2 games, we got to go into New England. I mean, what are the chances of getting any points in New England, to be honest?
And to me, when you're going to war with players like, with all due respect, Luke Moore, Dominic Oduro, who have done absolutely nothing, to me, is so hard to try and get the much-needed 2 wins that you need. I mean, with all due respect, Luke Moore easily should have had 2 or 3 on his foot on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. You're 100% right. But for me, as frustrating as Luke Moore has been, and even Oduro has been, I mean, you got to point the finger to Jermaine Defoe. I know he's been hurt for a large majority of the season, but when you're making $6.18 million and you miss the penalty shot that you did against Houston, it's tough. And to see his actions on the field, that's what really frustrated me, is to see his body language on the field, the complaining about the service. You know what, MLS, you're not always going to get the best passes, you're not always going to get the ball to your feet, but at $6.18 million, when you've been gone for a month and a half away from the team completely, you're going to come back with that kind of body language. For me, that's the really frustrating thing. I mean, I think Oduro has shown his potential and shown his talent at times throughout the season, but he hasn't been consistent enough. We saw how good he was against Columbus months ago. We saw how good he can be and how much his pace could really help this team out. But the frustrating thing is when your big money players, the guy you're spending $6.18 million on, is going to come into the team, going to show you some flashes of what he can do. I mean, we saw what he did in the opener against Seattle, and then you come back and we saw not only Wednesday's performance against Houston, but Saturday against the Red Bulls. He was non-existent as well.
Marco, for years I've made friends and I've lost friends because of my big mouth and my style, and I tell it the way it is, and that's what we do here on Red Card. And I'm going to tell it the way it is. Steven Caldwell is not the captain of this team. It is Michael Bradley. On the pitch, off the pitch, he is your leader. He is your pit bull. To me, there is a problem. And I got to tell you, next year, I would absolutely strip the captaincy from Caldwell if he's back and give it to Bradley, because I can tell you right now, I bet you younger players and all players around Michael Bradley will be more accountable to him than they've been to Caldwell. Am I off my rocker, or am I on target?
No, I think you're completely right in the sense that Michael Bradley really is this team's leader, both on and off the pitch. But at the same time, I feel Caldwell's absence, when he was injured, we saw how important he really was to the team. As far as him being a leader, you're 100% right. Michael Bradley's stepped up. He's taken that role, which is nice to see, because we haven't seen that from Jermaine Defoe. But at the same time, I think Caldwell's so crucial to this team, because when he's not playing, you had Nick Hagelin and Daniil Henry, a 21 and a 22-year-old, playing in the heart of your defense, and ultimately, I think that's what really did this team in, is the lack of depth at the back, because you had Mark Bloom playing beside them, who's almost just as inexperienced, and as great as Morrow has been, he was out at the same time Caldwell was, and our back line was shaky to say the least, and we saw the same goal scored against Toronto FC 10 times, the cross to the back post and the header in. There's only so many times you can allow the same goal, and I think that's what speaks to Caldwell's credibility, is when he is playing, you see a little bit of a difference. I mean, against New York, it wasn't his greatest performance, and I mean, the second goal you can easily attribute to him, but at the same time, it's frustrating, to say the least, when you go into games with a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old who, as good as they are, and I think they got loads of potential, just aren't ready to be a serious, or aren't ready to hold it down a back line during a stretch, during a playoff stretch in their first season. You know, I mean, Hagelin, like I said, he's been brilliant, and it was great to see him against Portland score those 2 goals, but at the same time, going into a pivotal match, is that really who you want at the heart of your defense? No.
You're bang on, Marco. You're bang on. Listen, a lot of people in the last number of weeks have been throwing a lot of mud and a lot of heat directed at Tim Lewicki and Tim Bazbachenko. I totally disagree, and I'll tell you why, Marco. Tim Lewicki and Tim Bazbachenko put all the tools in the toolbox. Now, when you go build that home, you've got to know which tools to use to build that home. And I got to tell you, Ryan Nelson didn't know how to use those tools. That's number one. Number two, I think the players now have to start taking responsibility. Enough of the GM and Lewicki, and now the other heat that's been thrown is at Greg Vanney. I've seen Greg Vanney in action with the academy since day one, since he arrived. He is a class act on the pitch and away from the pitch. He treats players, he teaches them, he develops them. I believe he's the right guy given the time. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit there, in the sense that Lewicki and Bazbachenko, you're right, they put the tools in the toolbox, but they also had Ryan Nelson driving the car, you know, and the problem is when you have as great as Nelson has been in terms of recruiting ability, we know what he did in terms of bringing Defoe and Julio Cesar over, and even Gilberto credits Nelson a lot for him coming over. At the same time, though, he was vastly inexperienced when he was hired last year, and his tactical awareness wasn't present. And we saw that this season. We saw the simplistic 4-4-2 far too often, and we had no response for teams that would sit back and allow us to control possession, and that would just get us on the counterattack. That was our weakness all season. We had no answer. And you're right, Greg Vanney is a great coach, and I mean, we don't really know much about him yet in terms of first division football, but at the same time, when you put a guy in there with 10 games left in a playoff stretch in a season where you're promising your fans you're going to make the playoffs, he was almost in an impossible situation.
Right, but I don't blame him, Marco. And going back to Lewicki, and going back to Lewicki, not getting rid of Ryan Nelson, I totally agree with you. At the season-ending press conference, I brought that up. With all due respect to Ryan Nelson, I've got more levels in coaching in Ontario and in Canada than Ryan Nelson does. And it isn't many levels. It's just the level of coaching rep soccer of my 2 sons. But that's more levels than Ryan Nelson had. And that's a fact. And not to put, more sand on Ryan Nelson, but that was the question in the offseason that wasn't answered. But again, going back, now, moving forward, if this team does not get into the playoffs, I can tell you right now, Marco, I'm hearing from all sorts of supporters, the Red Patch Boys, all the other supporters around the stadium, they're fed up. That next year, they're not going to run to put their money down, that they are going to wait. I believe this is going to be an unbelievable offseason for TFC's management to actually put 10,000 people in the start of the first game next year if something drastic doesn't happen. Your thoughts?
I think you're 100% right, but at the same time, at this time last year, I would have said the exact same thing you're saying right now. And we saw what they did in the offseason. And I mean, credit the organization for going out, spending an MLS record salary, and it's unfortunate they're not making the playoffs, but at the same time, I feel like they finally got some tools in the right place. And you know what? If Defoe wants to leave, I'm in the camp. Let him go.
Well, I'll open the door. I'll open the door for him. You make sure he doesn't get hit on the way out. Because to be honest, look, I like the signing of Defoe, and yes, he has produced when he's been healthy. But you know what? You don't want to be in the city that I love and I was born in and represent the city in MLS. Then get out. I've said this before, Marco, and again, it's not because I'm a Canadian Italian. No. But I'll say it again for a million times, and we went on Twitter and we had all sorts of people joining in, Marco. And it's simply this. They have tried so many other players from so many other parts of the world, and it has not succeeded. I look at Marco Di Vaio, a star in MLS. It has worked for the Impact. I look at guys like Keane in LA. It has worked. Why not try and go after Gilardino again? Or I understand possibly a Borriello. Not because he's Italian, but because he can actually produce, put the ball in the net, and not going to complain when he gets here about the city and the lifestyle.
I think you're 100% right, and you mentioned this actually last week on your show about catering to the Italian community, the Portuguese community, the large South American community. I mean, the rumors of Gilardino coming over, he apparently had accepted a deal, and we almost kind of screwed him over at the last minute when we found out we could convince Defoe to come. But like you just said, we shouldn't have to convince anybody to come. If they don't want to come to Toronto and play with their heart, especially when they're being paid $6.18 million to do so, it's frustrating. And I think if you bring in a guy like Gilardino, who's, he's at the tail end of his career, but has a lot to offer. Much like the Marco Di Vaio mode. And that to me is the frustrating thing, because I look at a guy like Gilberto, he's a designated player, but he's working his butt off. Believe me when I say that, inside the change room, outside, he's always got a smile on his face. He's always happy to do interviews. He's loving life. I remember after the 3-0 loss to New England, seeing him right outside the press room, playing with little kids. He was playing with 3 or 4 little children, and that is what you want to see in a player. And when you see a guy like Defoe come over here, it's frustrating because there was so much potential, and maybe the Nelson Sakin had something to do with his loss of enthusiasm. I don't know, but at the same time, it's frustrating. And back to your original question with the 10,000 people in the stands at the season opener next year, will it surprise me? No, but at the same time, I feel like there's finally some tools in place, and our defense is still shaky. I mean, we got some issues in the midfield, but bringing in the guys like Warren Creval, even Maduro, bringing in experienced veterans like that, even Luke Moore, is going to help this team moving forward. I think it's a mistake to completely blow up this team, but I think maybe if you do get rid of Defoe, you sell him for a record profit, and you bring in another star designated player. It doesn't even have to be a striker, maybe a defender, maybe a midfielder. It makes that much of a difference.
Marco, a couple more minutes, I won't let you go. So much to address in that last comment you said. But look, for the record, I want to be crystal clear. For the record, I could care less. Actually, my first choice would be to have a whole roster full of Canadian young kids and get into the playoffs. That would be my first choice. The reason why I keep saying try an Italian DP, try a Portuguese DP, is because it's never been tried here, number one. And number two, you have these communities here that are hungry for a name guy that's got a little bit of gas left into the tank to put this team into the playoffs. That's why I say it. Bottom line is that. Now, going back to what you said about not blowing up the whole roster, Luke Moore and Oduro, I gotta disagree. Luke Moore and Oduro can be easily replaced by American young players coming out of NCAA that'll give you a lot more and can finish with a lot more efficiency. That's one. Two, look, I would only keep 4 or 5 pieces from this squad right now, maybe 6, and you're gonna ask me which ones. Look, obviously Bradley. I would keep Bradley, and then I'd start looking around. Who else do I want to keep? What about Daniil Henry? Something tells me something's up there, Marco. You're training every day. I don't know if this young man is going to be here at the start of next season or if he's going to be sold. What have you heard there?
I haven't heard much about that, but what I have heard is, Daniil Henry is one of the closer guys I am with the team in terms of talking to. I see him all the time, and he loves Toronto. He loves playing with his home team. And actually, I sat down with Osorio earlier today, and he mentioned that it was Daniil Henry that had told him about TFC in the first place when he was still training in South America, and what got him to want to come over and try to earn a spot on this team. So I think if you do sell Daniil Henry, it's a massive mistake, because even yesterday for Canada, we saw what he can do. Yeah, he can be a little bit too aggressive at times, and we've seen how many penalty kicks he's given away, but he's still 21 years old. He's a homegrown talent with loads of potential. And as you mentioned, you want to see a team full of Canadian youngsters, and in the likes of Osorio, and in the likes of Daniil Henry, and in the likes of Kyle Becker, there's some potential there. How you foster it and how you grow it is where the issue lies, and that's where I think you need an experienced coach. And Greg Vanney would, like you said earlier, I think he would be an ideal guy to keep on for maybe another year and help these young guys develop.